by the courts as illegal. But when they registered drones in 2016, they registered 500,000 drones, and it's expected that there'll be over 20 million drones in the hands of consumers by 2020. Now, you have 20 million drones flying around. Maybe all of those are nice guys, but what if you have 1 million bad drones? How are you going to identify them?
An interesting question. Thomas, I wanted to ask you another question. We do know that these drones, which are autonomous for the most part, they're programmable. And as I think you mentioned earlier, that they could be set aloft, follow a predetermined flight pattern, and then come back and land at your feet and so forth. We all know that. I've seen some drones. But I wanted to ask you, the National Security Administration, who has been monitoring the Lionel Mandrake radio program for a few years now, I'm only kidding, but, you know, sometimes we get the idea that they're everywhere, that the national security agencies, those that are charged with the defense of the United States, that they would have some kind of a backup contingency plan in the event that drones, for example, are released near Trump Tower when President Trump is returning home, for example, and you don't want anything to happen. So do they have some kind of a way of turning off cellular phone service to a given zone so that these drones wouldn't be able to fly because the GPS coordinates that they need to follow would not be cellularly transmitted? Would that be a defense against them?
There's no question they could turn. You could turn off GPS. In Indefensible, that becomes one of the strategies the government decides to use because they found they had no other solution. Unfortunately, by turning off GPS for consumer use, it disrupted everything from aviation down to the opening and closing of bus doors.
How is that possible? Bus doors? Pre-programmed, like the bus pulls up, like an unmanned bus or something? Like an automatic?
That's right.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There are buses and vehicles that are GPS controlled where the doors are opening and closing based on GPS positioning.
I didn't know that.
You cannot ignore that. The technology that we rely on every day, from navigating around our neighborhood to getting into airliners because of GPS, if you were to turn GPS off, imagine the economic problems that would ensue immediately.
And see, that's the biggest danger in what we're facing with this is the fact that it's based on something that, you know, technology that we have all become too reliant on.
You're watching the Lionel Mandrake radio program with Lionel Mandrake and Matt Murdock. We're on the phone for a live one-on-one interview with the author of Indefensible by Thomas Banks. And Thomas Banks is telling us that we need to be really concerned because it's a fine line between chaos and civilization. You turn off GPS, you turn off our cellular phone service. Yeah. And come to think of it, it's what the North Koreans have been threatening. I just heard that they're talking about, they're not really so concerned about dropping nukes on American cities in so much as they're trying to create this here blast wave that could disrupt an electromagnetic pulse that could shut down the entire east or west coast of the United States of America, Tom. Yeah, have you read about that?
Bottom line is that with the technology that exists today, and you kind of alluded to it, earlier, Tom, the nuclear threat, that's passé now. This is the new thing that we have to deal with now.
Tom,
it's going to be even worse.
I wanted to ask you one quick question. Back in '97, President Clinton, I'm not what year it was around that time, President Clinton took control of the Department of Defense handling of GPS technology, which I believe at that time was in the hands of the Department of Defense, and changed it over to the Department of Commerce so that GPS technology could then be commercialized. Do you remember that back in the '90s? It was under the Clinton administration. Do you think that was a mistake? I mean, obviously, we all benefit from GPS. I'm an old school guy. I used to write notes down. Make a left on Main Street, go 3 blocks, make a right. There's no doubt about it. Nowadays, driving around with GPS is absolutely imperative. But it's like unintended consequences is one thing, but having the convenience is another. But what do you make of all this? Is there the name of your book is Indefensible, Thomas Banks, Indefensible. But if the North Koreans did an airburst, we had an electromagnetic pulse, everything is shut down, what are we looking at here? How many days would it take for us to recover from such a strike?
It could be something we couldn't recover from. It depends on how much damage. I'm not worried about an EMP attack because that requires a lot of energy to do that. but it doesn't require very much energy to deliver 1,000 drones with 1,000 pounds of C4 and poisons at 1,000 random targets, which are impossible to cope with.
Right. It's almost like a monster movie you're talking about here.
Yeah, we're talking about the next level of weapons of mass destruction.
It sounds
Right, and
like people really need to think about this.
Well, they do, because we happily, as Americans, and we're good people, we love technology. You know, we get our cell phones and we're happy. When Cooper and Mitchell created the cell phone back at Motorola, that was the actual, remember, it looked like a brick. They created the first mobile cell phone.
I thought the first cell phones were created in Israel. It was Israeli cellular technology. Is that correct, or was I mistaken?
But these are the Motorola guys.
Oh, Motorola.
But when they created their cell phone, never in their wildest imagination did they think that there was anything bad that would come from cell phones. Today, 1.6 million cell phone-related accidents happen a year. 10,000 people die.
Texting, driving, distractions.
Right. I'm not talking about radiation and brain tumors. I'm talking about cell phone-related car accidents. Mm-hmm. There are 7 million total accidents, and 1.6 million of them can be traced back to the cell phone. So our buddies Martin, Cooper, and Mitchell are nice guys, but they never thought when they created this device that they were going to have blood on their hands. And so now, 30 years later, there's 10,000 people a year are dying as an unintended consequence of their technology. This is what we have with drones. Nobody thinks that drones is a bad thing. What happens is the unintended consequences of drones is a bad thing. And we as Americans, we love our Constitution, and we think we have rights and privileges. Well, I do have a right to own a gun in America. It's articulated in the Constitution, but nowhere is it articulated that I have a right to have a drone.
Does it have to be articulated? Wouldn't that be just a consumer product that you have a right to have, just like you have a right to have a vehicle, a car?
And also the thing that goes along with
your driver's license is a privilege.
That's right. So you can't have a car unless you have a license, at least not legally.
And see, the thing about it is when somebody comes up with, technology that creates something wonderful as a cell phone or a drone or whatever example you can use, nobody ever seems to think, well, you know what? What if the bad guys get a hold of this? We're so dazzled with the wondrous things it can do that we don't think about if it falls into the wrong hands. And that's what you've captured here in your book, Indefensible.
Right. And it will fall in the wrong hands. And just like it wasn't so long ago that terrorists were far more removed. They would shoot a gun. They would maybe do they'd have to build an explosive, vest. Now they're driving onto a bridge, driving into shopping malls, and running over people. They're using technology.
Right. Tom, I wanted to ask you a question. Do you remember, I don't know the name of the movie, was it called Black Sunday, where somebody hijacked the Goodyear blimp and tried to crash it, explosive laden, into a Super Bowl? Do you remember that book, that movie,
Tom? I sure do.
Yeah, I wasn't sure of the name right. It just came to me now. So the idea has been around, mass casualties using a weapon of some sort. In this case, it was the Goodyear blimp in Black Sunday.
Yeah, that was a movie that was made way back in the 70s.
I don't know. I think it was like a mid-70s kind of catastrophe film. And the idea of terrorism, which I think became more a part of the Western consciousness since the 1972 Munich Olympics. If you remember when the Israeli team was massacred in Munich, Germany during the Olympics at the time, apparently the West didn't learn that we have to be a little bit more careful about our immigration policies and migration policies. And now it seems Europe itself has committed a terrible mistake by allowing unfettered, unrestricted immigration of people, many of whom are certainly, not that fond of the West other than what it could provide for them economically. And that's where the technology is. That's where the drones are. That's where the, these events seem to be happening more and more. What do you think about all this? Is it a continuation of something that we've just ignored for so long? Is it something that we are only now fessing up to, or is it something now that we're just trying to manage and deal with because the genie's out of the bottle? We can't get it back.
Yeah, I think your analogy there is valid. The genie is out of the bottle. The there's a body of people that are hell bent on hurting us. Whether we should be hurt or not isn't the question. We just know that there are people that are committed to doing this, and they'll use any means available to them. And the government could outlaw drones tomorrow, but for all I know, the large number of embedded jihadis, and depending on who you talk with, it's a big number. They could have been warehousing drones for the last year. They could have storage facilities filled with drones that nobody ever gave a second thought to, because for all we knew, they were an eBay seller and they sell drones on eBay. This technology is out there, it's available, and it's ready to be deployed. And we, as a body of people, need to be willing to take some serious steps to avert the co-opting of this technology to be used against us.
And speaking of things being available, I think at this point we should interject and let people know that your book, Indefensible, is available on Kindle and paperback from Amazon.com. And is there any email addresses or anything that you'd like people to let know how they can get in touch with you and find out more info about your book?
Sure, they can always visit indefensible.org. Indefensible.org. They can connect with me on Twitter. I'm DroneOn1 at Twitter, and I have almost 40,000 people that are involved in this discussion.
Wow, 40,000. That's a lot of drone followers. What is the interest that they have? Mostly with the danger that's posed, or they're just they're interested in drone for recreational purposes, or a little mixture of the both?
No, because the theme of my tweets is all about the threat and the risk, and the people that are following me are all resonating with this very obvious threat that no one has given any thought to.
Have you been approached by the authorities, Thomas? I hate to interrupt you there. The NSA, maybe it's the Department of State, somebody from from our defense, from Homeland Security. Have they approached you and asked you a little bit about what it is that you can help them understand more about this issue?
They have not, and as I mentioned when I first chatted with you, when Indefensible was first published and the paperback version became available, the very first copy that was sold in Washington, D.C.
How about that?
Red flag.
How unlikely is that to have been random?
Well, I think somebody there's paying
somebody's
attention.
attention.
Tom, I wanted to say, did you hear anything from any particular individuals in particular, like Newt Gingrich, or maybe like Comey himself, or anybody of that stature?
No, not at all. I've been actually unsuccessful in penetrating the veil
swamp.
of the swamp to get people to talk to me.
What do you think about General Mattis's strategy to, it's called an annihilation strategy. They just tried to retake Raqqa from the Islamic State, which calls itself ISIS, and other people call Daesh. Daesh is sort of like an unflattering way to refer to these people, so they don't like to be called Daesh, which is why other people like to call them Daesh. But ISIS is in Raqqa, and with help of U.S. support and backup, they were attacked 2 days ago, I saw, but I haven't heard anything since, on 3 sides. It's called an annihilation strategy. They don't want people leaving and moving over to the next town or vanishing into into the civilian population. It's annihilation, surround and kill to the last man. Is that part of what can make us safe? Do you think General Mattis's strategy here is something that is long overdue and something that the last 8 years has been woefully lacking in?
Well, the only enemy that we can actually address is that enemy overseas, because our Constitution limits us so dramatically that we can't be walking into mosques and throwing people into concentration camps, et cetera. The only answer that I think is available to America is to end it over there.
Before it comes here. Which it is here, some say, to some extent. You remember in World War II, the Japanese launched balloons that were sort of high up into the stratosphere through the Gulf, or the airstream, the stratospheric airstream, and they were landing in different areas of the Oregon, Washington State, maybe California. The idea was to start forest fires, maybe blow up whatever it might land on. And imagine how far technology has gone. Now we can actually pinpoint with these type of drone technologies exactly what the Japanese may have envisioned using balloons and atmospheric sensors and the airstream. Do you remember that? And also about our Constitution, Japanese people were interred in World War II despite the Constitution, and that was under a democratic regime of President Roosevelt. I shouldn't call it a regime. He was a Democrat and something of a socialist. He got us out of World War II. Unfortunately, we didn't end World War II because the Soviet Union immediately became the next bad guy that enslaved all of Eastern Europe for 50-plus years until the Cold War was ended by none other than President Ronald Reagan. But what do you think about all that?
I have Arab friends of mine, and I say to them when we have our discussions over a glass of wine and cigars,
Mukhtar.
If I were
do you have a cigar with Mukhtar?
concerned.
Let the man talk. Jeez.
No, but I tell them, if I were you, I'd be very concerned because history is always the best predictor. If society becomes fearful enough, they will do whatever they need to do to assuage that fear. And do not be surprised that if sometime in our future, if this gets out of control, that you won't find people of Arab descent being discriminated against and maybe even being interred.
Unbelievable. Is it a possibility? I mean, if it continues.
Because how do you fight this?
I think that the important thing to note is that we've gotten to a point in the West where it's not an existential threat as it was, let us say, in 1098 when Pope Urban II launched the First Crusade to retake Jerusalem because of a different civilizational struggle. It hasn't reached that point yet. But just look at the violence in Europe right now. Even in Germany, Angela Merkel let 1.2 million people, mostly from Syria, none of which are true migrants. In my opinion, I've looked at it. It seems that most of them are economic migrants, and a lot of them are not people who really hold Germany or Western civilization in such high esteem. They're in Europe, they're in Germany. Not all of them are bad. Of course, many are refugees. But things can get out of control, and people can be hurt if this isn't brought into some resolution, which, in my opinion, is stop the violence, stop the bombings, the killings, the running people over. But talking about it is not going to stop it. What's that, Murdoch?
And start standing up for themselves. Stop being in denial of the fact that there's a threat and say, look, we got a real problem here, and we need to face up to it and stand up to it.
Well, that's another subject. Go ahead, dear Tom.
We saw the challenge in London where the mayor of London took exception with Donald Trump's comment about terrorism in England. And this gentleman, being a Muslim and the mayor of London, pretty much thinks they don't have a problem.
Yes, your head in the sand.
His answer was the police showed up in 8 minutes. Well, we shouldn't have to have the police show up. We should be able to not have terrorism in the first place.
People people sort of sarcastically refer to London as Londonistan, mostly because it's 55% non-white and non-European, in the sense that many of them there's a very large migrant or immigrant population there, many of whom are good, law-abiding people and so forth. But the fact of the matter is, he did say, Mayor Khan of London, and I like to call it Londonistan every once in a while when I'm feeling a little testy, just to be a little sarcastic. But Mayor Khan did say that, living in a big city right now, part of the consequences of it is that there's going to be terrorism and people killed. Well, then how come for the last 50, 80, 90, 100 years of, England's, history, this was never something which was part of the history of London or of England? It's a new phenomenon that began in the 1960s when England began to look at immigration and not vetting people in the proper way. And this is the result of it. I don't want to get too much deeply into it. But, many people say it was a mistake. They need to slow down their migration. They need to have time for people to assimilate. And they need to stop, silencing people through politically correct thought control police who go after people for tweeting or talking about on Facebook a very real problem under the guise of you're discriminating, you're racist, and all the rest of it. Political correctness, when it's fused with identity politics such as religious politics, such as gender and sex politics, such as racial politics, separates people, and it makes people begin to understand or become aware of their differences. It's not good for unity. It's not good for e pluribus unum, the very idea that is on our dollar bills, and that was our national motto, out of many, one. out of many one, e pluribus unum. We have to stop with the identity politics, and the result of it is everybody is, at risk now, and to some extent, and especially in big cities like London.
True.
Thank
Very
you.
True. Yeah.
Well, the threat is real, gentlemen, and we need to. If our leadership isn't going to address it, we as the body of people that are we the people that need to be protecting ourselves, we need to be taking it to the streets and letting people know that there are threats out there that need to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but the problem, Tom, is that, there are a lot of we, the people, who don't see the problem and think that anybody who wants to do something to correct the problem, they see us as being the problem.
Vis-a-vis Donald J. Trump. He wants to do something about the problem. He's appointed General Mattis to do annihilation strategies that were neglected under the tenure of the previous occupant of the White House. And as a result, many people in the Middle East are suffered, displaced, become strangers in their own land, killed by ISIS, and forced to become migrants and migrate. Because, in my opinion, not yours, Mr. Banks, but in my opinion, mostly because of the last 8 years of inaction. And so as far as that goes, I think President Trump is onto something. We got to gain control of the problem. We have to be a little bit more serious about it.
I completely agree with you. And what we proved in this last election cycle is that we didn't have to become victims of the oppressive press. We were able to, as individuals, get on our own soapboxes, whether it's your podcast, your own radio and TV shows, Twitter, whatever. We were able to communicate and coalesce a movement, that a popular movement occurred and elected somebody that was outside of the Beltway. And that's what we have now. And we need to keep that pressure going, whether it's about we want our government to address this drone threat or we want our government to build better bridges. We, the people, are the ones that they work for, and we need to be constantly making sure our voice is heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we need to start being, as a people, more proactive instead of reactive. That's the problem right now. There's too many reactionaries and not people wanting to actually get things done.
And I honestly think that it's important enough to know that this here idea of what could happen if we neglect this new technology to the extent that we fall behind the curve, people can die, and who knows when Thomas, we have 7 minutes on the clock. I didn't think that the discussion would go this long, but it's been so utterly fascinating to me that it just flowed. But do you remember when there was an airliner, a 747, that exploded off of Mauritius, Long Island, back in the 90s. I forgot what flight it was. TWA flight something.
Flight 800 or something like that.
Flight 800. And the FBI director at that time said that, no, it was definitely something technical with the aircraft and not an attack. Sometimes I wonder about that because there were eyewitnesses. I'm not trying to be conspiratorial, who said that they saw what looked like something coming up from the ground. There were people who said they saw what looked like a rocket that destroyed the airplane over there, East Mauritius in Long Island back in it had to be 96, 98 or something like that. And also that other airliner that vanished. It was that airliner that vanished. They never found a trace of it just 2 years ago or so.
The Malaysian Air.
Malaysian Air flight.
Malaysian Air 370. Yeah.
Exactly. What do you think, now that we're on the subject, do you think that was terrorism? What happened to Malaysian Flight 370? Where'd it go? There's no trace of it.
Well, I don't think there's any question that it went down. The question is, why did it go down?
Right.
And you don't see me rushing to jump on third world airliners. And it's not high on my list.
Well, you're a pilot. You're a pilot there, Thomas Banks. You're a pilot. I'd like to mention, as a pilot, what do you fly? A multi-engine or what? Instrument?
Multi-engine.
What kind of a plane do you fly?
I'm instrument rated, a multi-engine pilot, a little over 2,000 hours.
What is 2,000 hours? Is that considered like a lot of flight time? I really don't know. I don't fly.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of flight time. It's not a lot of flight time as an airline pilot goes, who might have 20 or 30,000 hours over his career. But as a general aviation pilot, probably the average general aviation pilot in America has a few hundred hours.
Mm-hmm. And could a drone actually collide with, if a drone collided with your aircraft, your multi-engine, your two-engine aircraft, a Cessna, who knows, Could it? What could happen?
Well, it will hurt you. When we fly, we're very concerned about bird strikes. Mm-hmm. A 1 or 2 pound bird that impacts your windshield at 150 knots, 170 miles an hour, will come through the windshield and will kill you when it hits you in the head.
Yeah, but that windshield's pretty thick. It goes right through that glass like that?
Oh, sure. Oh, that'll just shatter that. Think about the kinetic energy of something that weighs a couple of pounds. It's like something that weighs 5,000 pounds dropped from 50 feet. It's gigantic. Look what happened to Sully Sullenberger's flight into the Hudson because of some geese.
Right, LaGuardia. He took off from LaGuardia.
Right. So that was just some birds that killed the engines.
Both engines, in fact, both went out.
Right.
Remember that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Miracle on the Hudson. You wouldn't believe it if I told you this, but my partner was a law enforcement officer who was stationed on Hudson River Park. His name was Gerald Esposito, God rest his soul, a very good friend of mine. He was law enforcement. He was there stationed. And all of a sudden, he said to me that he saw a plane floating by. It was floating by Pier 40 over on the west side of Manhattan. And, of course, by that point, there were helicopters and everything else there, and there were people standing on the wings. And people were saying, I think Geraldo Rivera actually tried to say that Sullenberger may have been, mistaken in taking the plane out because there was some engine repairs made that weren't fully, they were certain if the repairs were correct. But I think Geraldo Rivera had to kind of backtrack from that because Sullenberger was an absolute hero. I heard that water landings, hard water landings, are very difficult to do, especially in an airplane like that, a commercial airliner, because it could flip, it could roll, it could break, and he did it just fine. What do you think about that?
Well, I think my personal belief is that professional pilots, like airline pilots, I think most of them could have made that landing, and that's good. Mm-hmm. The fact of the matter is, it's a bad situation. An off-airport landing anywhere is a bad scenario, whether it's a cornfield, a street, or the water, is something we don't want to have happen. But the reality is that if you're landing at John Wayne Airport in Orange County or LaGuardia, and you're on final approach, and a half a dozen explosive-laden drones just pop up out of the blue on final approach and explode, the air burst and the distribution of shrapnel is enough to destroy the airplane because, remember, a few geese took down
Sullenberger's plane.
On the Hudson. So, and that was just some geese, not explosive-laden, shrapnel-laden, fast-moving, well-targeted devices.
Thank you very much, Thomas. It's been very interesting speaking with you. Murdoch and I are very honored that you appeared on our show, Lionel Mandrake radio program. The name of your book is Indefensible. It describes the potential for terrorism, modern technology, and a very evil guy who's sinister named Mukhtar Barakat. An interesting novel and certainly an interesting concept.
And there are some people that are already saying, Tom, that your book would make a great movie. What do you think about the prospects of that?
Well, 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'm having a discussion with a group that wants to buy the movie rights to it.
Well, Mr. Banks, I'll tell you this much: if you need your hero, and I'll be like a Clive Cussler character. I'll be sort of like I don't know if you ever read any of Clive Cussler's. I'll be like Dirk Pitt. So if you need a Dirk Pitt, I'm willing to take the role. I come cheap. I'll do it. I'll come on the show. I'll be a great leading man. Thank you very much, Mr. Banks. It's been a pleasure. Thomas Banks, Indefensible, and we would like to have you back on the show again, Mr. Banks, if you don't mind.
Anytime you guys want me back on, I'd love it. You guys are wonderful. Thank you.
It was a pleasure having you as a guest.
Thank you very much. All right, everybody.
God bless you, gentlemen.
God bless you, too,
God
Thomas.
bless America, guys.
Thank you very much, Lionel Mandrake radio program. God bless you all. Indefensible, Thomas Banks. Go out, buy it, read it. And remember, God bless America and give Donald Trump, President Trump, a chance. Do not believe these lying liberals and their lying forked tongues. Am I right, Murdoch?
I believe mainstream media got a big fork stuck in them yesterday.
We'll talk about that tomorrow's show. Thank you very much. God bless America and God bless Murdoch.